Welcome to the Post Click podcast. We are going to cover everything from CRO and obviously A/B testing, which is the main part of CRO, landing pages, things that we feel are talked about not enough, and things that we might actually have a different perspective of. So, hopefully, we can teach you guys some cool things. Hopefully, we can make you think. And we would love to hear from you if you agree or if you disagree. So, today, let's get things started. I'm Kanika. I run a agency who specializes in CRO. How surprising. It's called Better Growth. And
I'm Ryan Doney. I run PageDeck, which is a landing page platform for D2C brands. We do a lot of A/B testing, and that's where we're going to start today.
yeah, let's do it. Let's just dive right in. So today we are covering, hey, are your A/B tests lying to you?
I think important conversation to have in the era of lots of A/B test screenshots on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and it's easy to get, I think, a huge sense of FOMO when you see a lot of people posting a ton of winning tests, but you don't see all the stuff under the hood. And I think a big part of that, as a brand owner, even as someone who's new to the agency world, the SaaS world, whatever you're doing in CRO, you need to be able to know, is an A/B test valid? And there's a few different parts of that. So you want to kick it off, Kanika? We're going to try to break this down into a few different pillars. Like, what are the main 4 or 5 things that you need to understand in order to be able to tell, should I run this A/B test? When you're looking at results, are they valid? Can you be confident in launching those out to the main site? So where are we going to start?
Yeah, actually, you know what? Before I even dig into our little points of interest, our series of convos today, our bullet points, one thing that you just made me think of that I think everyone should keep in mind, but I think it's also really surprising for people, is it's been a while since this study was released, but I remember seeing it a long time ago. And I think it might have been CXL. And if you don't know CXL, CXL are like the OG CRO folks. I started doing CRO back when I was in SaaS in like 2013, and they were already around, but I think they go back a little bit before that. And so, anyways, they published some study maybe like 2017, 2018. So it's been a bit, but they said for every company that's running internal, so in-house CRO testing, you have your own in-house team, the win rate of tests is typically, again, I'm remembering this from the top of my head, it's typically around 13 to 17%. So that gives you some perspective. And then when you're working with a company that specializes in CRO, so when you're outsourcing it or you have a vendor, you have an agency, you have a partner, I think that win rate goes up to something like maybe 20%, 23%. So that's like around 1 in 4 CRO tests win, right? So something to keep in mind. I also might be overshooting that, but I think it's a shocking number, and people don't realize that because exactly to your point, Ryan, you get on X, Twitter, you get on LinkedIn, you talk to people, you listen to podcasts, and it sounds like people are just winning, winning, winning left and right. But the reality of it is that's not the case. And as it relates to this episode, are your A/B tests lying to you? Most likely, the ones that you're seeing a lot of the time, they're probably lying to you. So today we're gonna go ahead and cover that. Um, the factors in A/B testing is really what we're covering, right? So length of testing is something that pops up all of the time. People say, oh, I'll just test this until stat sig. And that could be in 2 days, that could be in 5 days, that could be in a month, that could be in 2 weeks. The general rule of thumb is you always want to run your A/B test for a minimum of 2 weeks. No matter what your little stat sig calculator says, run that test for 2 weeks. I don't care if you have 250,000 people, a million people coming to your site every single month. The reason that you need to run your test for 2 weeks is because you want to account not only for day-to-day variance, which is some people saying, okay, you can run it for a week. Yeah, okay, you have, Monday's data, Tuesday's data, Wednesday's data for a week. Sure, but that's not enough. You need to have weekly variance as well, right? So you want to have 2 weeks of Mondays, 2 weeks of Tuesdays, 2 weeks of Wednesdays, so you can really understand and try to imitate a real world situation. Obviously, ideal situation is the longer that you can run a test, the more realistic it is, the more you're collecting data on a real life situation. You have to do cost benefit. Does it make sense to run a test for 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks? In most cases, you know, running a test past 4 to 6 weeks, that's a really long time. Sometimes you have to, based on your company, based on your AOV, based on a bunch of different factors, but that is what you need to consider is, can I run this longer? What is the cost benefit? So 2 weeks, no matter what, I don't care if you get stat sig in 3 days, that is way worse. That is the number one reason people say, yeah, we got a win, and then I just didn't feel it. I never saw it, you know? Well, duh, because it wasn't real.
The stats are lying to you. And you mentioned cost benefit analysis. When I was in the agency world, working with basically entirely D2C brands and with e-com brands, that was always the conversation that we started with because in that world, almost all of your traffic is paid traffic. And that means that for every week you're running these tests, you're paying to run the tests just to send traffic to them. So you have to hope that at the end of that test, you're going to have an outcome in terms of the performance increase that is going to be worth funneling all of that traffic and paying the opportunity cost of doing that. So, I mean, we'll get into, taking big swings versus incremental testing later, but when you're prioritizing the different tests that you should run, you want to, I think, if you're just starting out in CRO, go for the test that could potentially make the biggest difference in performance, because that means you're likely going to need fewer weeks, fewer dollars in your ad account to send the traffic to those tests before they get validated out. And you can be sure that it's actually a real outcome.
Agreed.
Hmm.
People don't like to hear it. I know it sucks. I know you want to get those wins as quickly as possible, but trust us when we say it's in the best interest of your business, your wallet, your bottom line, your profit, the rest of your company, your future, to run these tests for at least 2 weeks and run it until statistical significance. Now, if you run a test for that long, or even you give it another couple of weeks and it's still only at 50%, 60%, 70%, it's that same cost benefit analysis you have to run. And at that point, you ask yourself, well, we've not really gotten super close to stat sig. Even at that point, maybe you're at 80, right? But if that lift is only 2%, 1%, 0.5%, does it make sense? Like, is that going to get you those dollars back that justify it? Ask yourself that. Maybe yes. If you're really, really big, like a 1% lift, maybe, but you've got to actually plug in your costs to understand.
Yeah. And to that point, not to take us on a tangent, but I think there are things that you just shouldn't test, like especially if you are a smaller brand, even like a mid seven figures revenue brand, and you're just trying to step into optimizing your site. I don't think you need to A/B test absolutely everything. I think using your marketing brain, your UX brain, whatever skill set you have, and trying to just make things better on a day-to-day basis and going by gut feel to a certain extent, like not by the book, but if you just try to keep making things better, keep looking at your analytics, keep looking at your heat map, see how people are interacting with your site. If you do that over time, things are going to improve. Now, you're going to reach a point where you get diminishing returns on that type of thing. You have to start being a little bit more scientific, but there's a lot of stuff that you don't need to test, I think, because the business outcome isn't there. It's not going to drive enough revenue after you launch that test to justify the cost of running it. So bear that in mind, I think, when you're having the CRO conversation, is some things don't need to be tested. Just try to make things better on an ongoing basis. And the really important things, the things that are going to move the needle in a big way, aim to launch those first.
100%. And then, that's a muscle that needs to be exercised, and you'll get better at understanding what those things are. Because the reality of it is, and like the industry at large, it's correct in the idea that there's some small tweaks that can have really outsized impact, right? So like things like discount badges, for example, like that can have outsized impact, and it's a fairly small when you think about it. You're striking through something, but like, or you're displaying a percentage versus a dollar amount. Those things are individual changes that should be considered versus, hey, like the everyone mentions it. Can I change the color of this button? Is that something you should spend time testing? Probably not, right? Anything that's broken, obviously fix that. Anything that is no longer accurate, I've had that question before. So like, oh yeah, now we include this and this actually, or now, we have customer service available 24/7. Yeah, go change that. Those are things that you just fix. So anything that has to be fixed, just go do it. That does not need to be tested because people get hung up, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
Do the
but
obvious things. YOLO
yeah.
updates are okay sometimes.
Oh, like if you have to fix it, if that's just making your brand and what you're actually communicating accurate and true, go do that. But the safest thing to do, obviously, is to A/B test everything. But to Ryan's point, especially the smaller you are, the newer you are, I speak to a lot of brands, I mentor a lot of brands that are early seven-figure brands. And the reality of it is that your ads are going to have a larger impact than any isolated CRO test that you run, almost any isolated CRO test that you run. And focusing on website and CRO, that can be a really easy scapegoat to go, fall into because you feel like you're making progress, right? You're checking off boxes. Ooh, I'm making this look prettier. Ooh, I'm adding a review. Ooh, I'm adding some stars. Ooh, I'm doing, whatever it may be. You feel like you are falsely making progress, but that has no guarantee to make money for you, right? When you are fairly new or still trying to get your traction, focus on how can I get to a point where I'm sort of ready to scale. I'm sustainable because again, CRO is optimization. It is not foundation building. It is optimization. So you have to have your foundation there first, then start relying on tests.
So I think what we came to then, in terms of how long do you run a test for? Minimum 2 weeks, just because of the dynamic of needing to get every day of the week, simply put, in terms of performance. And then don't test everything. Two big takeaways from that first point. Let's talk about how many sessions related to length of test, and all of these are related, of course. But I I start this conversation always by if you're not prepared to send thousands of sessions through a test, then just don't do it. Um, this depends greatly on how big a performance increase or decrease you get out of the test. But if you can't afford to send 5,000 sessions through either side of a test just as a starting point, then probably just don't. So again, opportunity cost. Can you afford to do this? Is it going to make a difference? How do you approach this conversation when you're talking to clients about it?
Yeah, I think that's a very common question that we get, especially because we, similarly to you, Ryan, we approach CRO in a very different way. And so people often will come and say, hey, I heard I need at least 50,000 sessions just to this test, or I need at least, 500 orders per variant just to get statistical significance. What do you think? Is that possible? And I get that. Like that is sound logic as a benchmark because like anything else, it's the easiest way to generalize an answer that usually is correct. But huge asterisk is that is usually correct when it comes to small isolated tests. Because when you're looking at a page and you're looking at it one to one, you can have, your control variant, so the original, and then let's say you change the drop down to radio buttons. Okay, and you're saying, is that going to make it easier to use? They can see, each of the options rather than having to open a drop down. Okay, like maybe that's a good test. Maybe you saw in your recordings and things that like it's bothering people, whatever. Maybe you have good reason for that. But if you put those pages one to one and you ask a random stranger, hey, can you tell the difference between these two pages? It's going to take them a little bit, right? Like they might not even be able to tell you. Like if you just say, hey, are these two pages different? It's going to take them a sec. They might even say, I actually don't know. I can't figure it out. And that is why you often need a really high session count when you make these types of changes, because in order to really be confident, statistically significant, that one is better than the other, you need a ton of people to see it. And then you need a ton of interactions and engagements and actual, conversions to say, yes, this is confidently the better version. However, like Ryan and I both think about CRO, and we've kind of alluded to already, there are things that people forget when it comes to stat sig. And the biggest thing that statisticians don't really tell you is that the delta in performance makes a massive difference in statistical significance. And so when you have two versions of a page that are very different, when you can look at them in 1 second and somebody says, heck yeah, that is different. You're creating a different user experience in its entirety. That means that when people hit that page, they are going to act very differently from one experience to the other, which means that delta in performance is going to be bigger, which means you actually need less data to reach statistical significance because that difference in conversions or AOV and ultimately your revenue per session, that is going to be much greater because those pages are so different.
I completely agree. And I would encourage people to, well, also, we're going to find stuff to argue about on this podcast. I promise. We're not going to agree on everything, I'm sure. But I would encourage people to go and, Google A/B test calculator and start punching in how long you're going to run a test for, how many sessions on each side of the test, the difference in conversions, because you'll really quickly see how hard it is to reach statistical significance on a small test. This is terrible radio, but if I read off exactly what I have in front of me, punch into an A/B test calculator, if you run a test for 14 days and you send 2,000 sessions to one side and 2,000 sessions to the other side, and there's a 20% difference in that test, like you got a 20% lift in your conversion rates. That's not a small lift in conversion rate for the winning variant, right? And I think a lot of people, particularly in my world in D2C, would call that like a significant big test. But if you take those exact numbers, the amount of sessions, how long you ran it for, and the number of conversions, to reach hard stat sig, you'd have to run that test for 82 days. Like imagine pounding traffic through that test for 82 days and how much money that would cost you in paid traffic to do that. It's not going to move your bottom line. You're just going to spend all of your profits away. But if instead you run that test and you aim for a 40% lift, like you send half of your traffic to a PDP, half your traffic to a very different landing page, sales page, an advertorial, whatever it may be. Now you have to run it for 13 days. So that's an extreme case. I will say like hoping for a 40% lift in conversion rate from one test is like pipe dream stuff, right? But even with that, you still have to run it for 2 weeks minimum. Like it's really, really difficult to run enough traffic from paid media to these tests and have it make a difference. So all the more reason to start with the big stuff, right? Because you need to send a certain amount of sessions to that test. How do you get it down to an amount that you can afford to spend the money on traffic to do it?
At the end of the day, it's business. Like you got to risk it to get the biscuit, and it's always true. It is inherently true of testing that there is an element of risk. If you are somebody that cannot risk any even slightly meaningful amount of money, like $5, I don't care. Like you're not impressing anybody. Like even like $100, you're still not impressing anybody. But like if you cannot risk some percentage of your revenue, realizing and acknowledging it is a temporary short-term loss that allows you to learn. If you can't do that, don't test. But also be prepared for your business to stagnate and also be prepared to wonder often, oh, why is my revenue going down? Oh, did I make some change? Oh, like you're going to be doing a lot of Sherlock Holmes work that sucks, frankly. But if you're prepared to take some risks, that's when you should be A/B testing. Just know that they should be calculated risks, and you should be doing some of that math beforehand to understand what should I be aiming, what does that ROI look like, and we'll cover that in another pod. But be smart when you're running these.
I think that pretty easily leads us into another pillar, the third pillar, which we're calling difference in performance. Um, this concept of big swings versus more incremental traditional CRO. And I think it's pretty clear at this point that we both sort of lean towards this bigger swing, take bigger risks types of testing. When you are thinking about this, Kanika, you have a new brand, you're just working with them for the first time. How do you think about what to test? And then maybe more tactically, like, where do you start? Like, I'm a brand doing 7 million in revenue. I want to get started with optimizing my site. I don't know where I want to start with that. What are you telling me just as a baseline? I think it'd be useful to come away from this with like some things that people can go and implement.
Yeah, you know what? I'll be honest, and maybe this is a place that we actually have our first pod disagreement. I'm really not a big believer in best practices. Best practices typically tend send people down this rabbit hole of spinning their wheels, and they end up actually spending a lot more time and money wasting efforts than if they had taken the time to look at the data and to analyze what they need and to really meet the customers where they're at, or just taking what works for this other random brand and saying, oh, that's going to work for me when it's probably not even an issue. Like that's not even on your customer's radar, but now you're going to spend 2 weeks testing it and designing it and doing all this stuff. So where do I start is I need to understand what are the things that currently are getting people to buy from you? What are those values? What's the story you're telling right now? Okay, great. Then where are you sending people, right? Like that's the natural first question. Where is the majority of your traffic going? Okay. How can we then think about that journey from the ads, whatever that communication is, whatever those values, whatever that story is that you start to tell, how can we then continue it in the best way possible?
Where
And
do you go
sometimes that's with
looking
landers.
for that data? I mean, because if that is the first thing you're starting with, what are
Mhm.
the first few things that you're going to go and dig into?
Oh man, we have such a big process for this. So what we start with is GA4. We're going to go and look at like navigation paths, where are people going on your site, where do they go back and forth, where do they start, where do they end, how many people are actually taking actions on each of those individual pages. There's a lot more on kind of that quantitative side that we look at. But then on the qualitative side, that's a massive part of our process as well. And I think not enough people spend time there. We spend a absurd amount of time on video recordings, on session recordings, right? So we spend a ton of time watching people on any high traffic page to understand what are they doing, what's causing friction, what seems to be working, what seems to be confusing, is there something that's missing? There's a whole myriad of questions that we need to answer, and that will help equip us to create a new experience that still keeps the good stuff, cuts out the bad stuff, and then adds in what might be missing. Um, so session recordings, click maps, duh, you see what people are clicking on. That also allows you to understand, do we keep this? Do we cut this? Is this just not working? Is it just confusing? And then one of the other big pillars of what we do in this process is we look at forums. We do a lot of external research. So we go into Reddit, we go and see what are people saying. What are they saying about your brand? If it's an ecom brand, what are they saying about your SaaS company? If it's a SaaS company, what are they saying about your competitors? What are they saying in general? So what are the types of things that the type of customer you have are saying, right? So not necessarily if they're not talking about, Ryan's hat company, what are they asking about hats? What do they say to each other? How do they speak about it? What do we need to make sure to cover as well?
Reddit is such a gold mine, an underutilized gold mine, I think.
100%. I think people get lazy, right? They've figured out, hey, we can get people to buy from us, so we don't have to go in and dig and see like what are those underlying, human elements. But that's how you get people to convert. It's not your drop down. It is the story that you tell people.
And to that end, Microsoft Clarity is free, everyone. There's no reason to not have heat maps on your site. It's very, very good. You get like purchase heat maps, like when people click on a thing, how often do they buy, scroll depth, session recordings, all up. It's a great tool.
Agree, agree. A few years ago, it used to be slow, but they fixed it. They reached out and told us they fixed it. So it's great, and you get unlimited data. If there's ever a time and place to get more sophisticated, there's other tools out there as well. But for anyone who hasn't spent much time actually analyzing those session recordings, which is almost everybody I speak to, just go use Clarity. It's gonna take care of the job. And then if you become one of my people and you spend 20 hours a week watching video recordings, then call me and I'll tell you what to do next.
Also, there are AI summaries of the video recordings. If you're feeling incredibly lazy, it's better than nothing, but please just watch the recordings. Just like have a drink, watch some session recordings, do it at the end of the day. You'll be surprised what you'll find in there, especially in some of the longer sessions where people are clicking on things and scrolling up and scrolling down. You'll almost always find things that people are like they're getting blocked by something or they're hovering over something that is particularly confusing that you need to rearrange or rewrite. It's so valuable. We can argue about best practices if you want. I am of the opinion that I mean, yes, following best practices blindly, like that's not going to move the needle for you. But I think in the spirit of doing things that don't necessarily need to be tested, which we touched on, if let's just take a PDP, like for what it's worth, like Everyone sends traffic to a PDP, whether you're running other landing pages, whether you're running traffic to the homepage, like everyone finds himself on the PDP. If your PDP is bad, I think there is something to be said for doing the low hanging fruit, obvious improvements that you should do. For example, if you don't have reviews on your PDP, probably put reviews on your PDP. If your product images are bad, probably spend some time on your product images. Like if you're watching screen recordings of PDPs, 90% of the time people are spending just like scrolling through the product carousel and looking at the price. And this doesn't go for all pages, but that buy box section on your PDPs has to be really good because it's what drives all of your purchases and it's where people spend most of their time. When you get into like, your CTA button has to be above the fold. You have to have X type of content on your PDP. That's where it gets a little bit fuzzier for me, where you're trying to like shove all of these tactics into one page without really considering whether or not it's going to make a difference. Then yes, I agree with you. But I think if you look at your pages with a UX eye, and making them feel better and look better and have the necessary information people need to buy, it's probably going to be better, especially if you're starting from complete scratch, like a dry Shopify theme. Just take the useful information that people need to know about your product and make sure they can find it.
100%. And let me clarify, when I say best practices are kind of useless, I think best practices are useless when it comes to a testing sense, right? So, like, when you already have that foundation, in my mind, A/B testing happens after you have a foundation. So, when you are in a process of optimizing, when you have a sustainable baseline where it's okay, right? Like, you have a business, you've proven product market fit, you are running, you're rocking, you're growing maybe, or you're at least staying steady, but you come to the point where you say, huh, I need to grow more. And my costs are going to limit me from hitting my goals. Now I need to become efficient. At that point, when you need to become efficient to increase your contribution margin, to increase your top line, whatever it is, that is when you start A/B testing. And that is when I think people waste a lot of time on best practices, because the chance of somebody's random list, even if it's a similar brand to yours, right? Like if you have a men's shoe wear brand and then you go and see somebody's case study who said, I did this for my men's shoe wear brand, the chances of that winning for you, 50. It's a coin toss, right? And if you do a lot of those 50 coin toss tests over and over and over again, and that's your whole roadmap for testing, the chances of you losing most of them, you're going to lose most of them because it's not based on your data. And their customers are used to totally different things, even if they are men's shoes. They're men, they're buying shoes, even if it's like men who like to rock climb, they're men's rock climbing shoes. The way that the other company has built their brand, the way they communicate with their brands, the ads they use, everything that makes that company theirs, their cogs, like all of these things are different than yours. And because of that, the difference is going to relate to how people interact with the brand, which means that that's how they interact with the site. And that's going to be different too. So adding those into your site and assuming that most of them are just going to work, if you're established, it's a recipe for failure.
The if you're established piece, I think, is the important part. Because I was just about to keep trying to fight with you because you just told me at the beginning of the episode that most tests fail. So, me, the brand owner, who doesn't, have a background in CRO, but I'm just trying to make things better. Why wouldn't I like look at my competitors that are bigger than me and try and copy paste some of that stuff onto my site too? Because I know most of them are going to lose, but maybe I'll find some wins and it'll still end up helping me.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The way that I think about it, again, is cost benefit analysis. Do you want to give yourself the best chance at success, or do you want to give yourself a better chance at winning if you craft those tests for your own audience? If you use your own data, your own engagement to create those tests and run those tests. Does that mean that you can't use best practices for inspiration? No, we use best practices for inspiration. Can you not use heuristic audits for CRO? Of course you can, right? It's really helpful to get a third set of eyes who might not be getting into your data and telling you, hey, this looks good, this doesn't look good. Here's what I would think. Maybe this is causing friction. Those things are super, super helpful. But what people forget is that those are directional suggestions and you need to validate them with your data. Otherwise, you're just guessing. But why wouldn't you give yourself the best shot at winning? And maybe you turn into one of those brands where your win rate is 50%, if that's if that's even possible, right? Or 30% or 40%. Like the 23% or whatever I said earlier, that's an average. So that means that there's brands above it, right? Or there's CRO tests that are winning at a higher rate too. Why don't you want to become one of those brands or companies that's winning at a higher rate?
It is clear that we're going to need an episode on hypothesizing and
Yeah,
prioritizing tests,
for
like
sure,
just a
for sure.
walkthrough of here's your starting point, here's what to look at, here's how to prioritize, here's what to test first.
Yeah, agreed.
That seems super obvious to me. Let's, let's talk about traffic source because I think that is, especially for a lot of the brands that are kind of in our space,
Hmm.
probably the biggest indicator of funnel stage and of awareness level in a world where, ad targeting is not perfect anymore and we're not necessarily running top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel campaigns directly anymore. Um, how do you think about this?
I still think that it's based on the channel itself as a whole, right? So if you are reaching people via Meta as the majority of your ad spend, then to me, that's majority top of funnel. That's majority education because that is demand gen in my eyes. And so you are telling a story via your ads, you're generating that demand, and then you need to continue to reel them in, hook them in, and get them to convert throughout the rest of the process. So for me, if you have a majority of your ad spend on Meta, you are throwing out, your fishing reel, having something nice on that hook, and bringing them in. And that's when you need to be more top of funnel. That's when you need to educate and have a lot more of that typical traditional, cold education and strategy behind it. When it comes to Google, if the majority of your traffic is coming from Google, then people are coming to you, right? So instead of you throwing out your hook, they're already hooked. They're looking for the fisherman. Well, they're already aware of what you have. You don't have to tell them what you have or that it even exists. You need to now tell them, here's why it works. And then depending on where they are in that, you got to look into your data. You got to back to the data. What are they searching for? What are the specifics around it? That will tell you where they are in that kind of middle to bottom of funnel, right? If I'm looking for socks that reduce my veins or something, right? Okay, so I might sort of be aware of the fact that there's a solution. So I'm sort of warm, but I might not necessarily know that I need compression socks specifically, right? Versus the person who is searching compression socks for vein reduction, right? Oh, they know that they need compression socks. They just don't know which ones are the best for them. So, you kind of have to get a little granular in there, but either way, when it comes to Google, you are not telling them that something exists at all. They're aware the fact that there is a solution, they're solution aware, but they're not necessarily product aware. They don't know that your solution exists. And then if they are, they know that, compression socks exists. They don't know that your specific brand exists, right? And then at that point, you get specific into the information to tell everyone why you're better than the next compression sock brand.
That is something that we see working really well. On the Google side is that high intent traffic where people are solution aware, not necessarily looking for your brand. You can kind of siphon off some traffic from competitors by launching comparison pages. And there's kind of two ways to do it. It can either be, an us versus them page, like a your sock brand versus Bombas, like if people know about your brand. If you're a little small and there's not necessarily a lot of search volume for you specifically, you create more of an alternative page, meaning the best Bombas alternative, and here's why. So I think the punchline being creating a post-click experience that matches your ad is really, really powerful and is something that you should do because all of a sudden now you have these different funnels that exactly match the intent traffic that's coming through them. Same goes for Meta because even though Meta is a demand gen platform, is probably a little more top of funnel than Google, it is still a direct response platform for a lot of brands. And in the same way that we did that for Google, creating unique pages per ad creative that is kind of the way that people have backed into targeting these days, is by launching specific creatives to a specific customer avatar for a specific problem that they're trying to cover. If your page that they get to after that ad speaks to the messaging from that ad, it's almost always going to convert better over time. Like, it just is, because you can say things on something like a landing page that are specific to that campaign, specific to that audience, that you can't do on your product page, because your product page gets own channel traffic, it gets organic traffic, it has to be all things to all people. And at the end of the day, that is where, again, taking some of these bigger swings come in. You're creating a very unique experience per funnel that is probably going to move the needle in a big way.
100%. Like, how annoying is it when you get an ad and they're speaking to like your exact problem and you're like, oh my God, these people get me. And then you click on it and then it either brings you to a homepage, which is the most frustrating because you're like, wait, that's not what I was looking at. Now I have to go do work to find it. Okay, see ya.
My favorite
Or
is when you get like a product carousel ad for like a jacket. You click on the jacket and now you're at a homepage and they have a
that's wild.
300 SKU list store and you can't find it.
It's so annoying. Even in emails when that happens, like we'll cover that another day, but like when you get to the point where you can create dedicated landing experiences also for your emails, you should, because I'm going to be so annoyed if you're giving me 20% off and I want this thing and then I have to go search for it. No way. I'm out. But even otherwise, to your point, like if I see this ad and it feels like it's really speaking to me and I'm like, oh, these people, they're in my brain, right? They went and did all my research and they looked at what I was commenting on Reddit and they're in my brain. Amazing. They know me. I click on it. And then I land on this PDP, and that PDP is not talking about that issue that really got me in because I felt like they knew me. Well, okay, see ya, probably, right? Versus, oh, this lander continues to reinforce that messaging. That lander is continuing to make me feel like they know me and they can solve my problem and they're going to be, make my life better in some way. Um, that being said, like again, you can't just ignore your PDPs. You can't ignore your homepage, but a theme that's popped up in this episode has been cost benefit analysis. So if the vast majority of your growth is coming from paid sources, a lot of the time it's going to make sense to focus on those landers first. But if everything you have right now is going to a PDP, okay, consider, your resources, consider what you have going on, consider your risk tolerance to being able to test, then maybe you should focus on a PDP, which we'll also cover in a different episode. Regardless, don't ignore those other pages. Don't ignore what I call your organic site, which does have to be all things to all people, but make sure that you're taking the learnings from your landers, from your ads, and finding a way to blend it in so that no one feels alienated, but realize it's never going to be as impactful as a custom message.
Different tools for different jobs, I think, at the end of the day.
Exactly that. Different channels, different pages, different experiences for all of them.
There's a lot of surface area to cover when you're running an online business. I think it's a good place to wrap it. That's a lot to cover. Certainly step into A/B testing with some thought. Don't just copy paste best practices on top of everything and start rolling out tests. Look at the data, look at your heat maps, look at GA4, whatever your analytics tool is. We're going to do a GA4 episode too. I have GA4 thoughts that I need to share with the world, and I have some people I think we can have on for that.
Sounds good.
All right, Kanika, first episode. Thanks to everyone for listening. We'll have more CRO content coming your way very soon. So subscribe, follow us on social. I'm at the Ryan Doney on X, Twitter. Where can people find you, Kanika?
I am Kanika_Misra, also on the X/the Twitter/the Facebook. Just kidding. Do not find me on Facebook. LinkedIn, we're both there as well. We'll answer you if you ask us questions. And if you have ideas for things that you want us to cover, find us on X, find us on LinkedIn. You can email me through my website, betabetagrowth.com. Anywhere you find me, you can find me on the street as well. That sounds sketchy. Don't find me or look for me on the street. But if you see me, tell me what you want us to cover on the pod.
That is a fantastic place to end it. Thank you for listening, everyone, and take care. We'll see you in the next one.
Thanks.